All right, good evening. I'm Richard Nobles, and I serve as chair of the License Advisory, License Psychology Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Tuesday, the 10th of February, 2026, and I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic media. Linda Heitzman Powell.
Present.
David Stevens is not here yet. Jennifer Fontaine.
I'm here.
Daniel Garlock.
I am here.
Matthew Goker will not be in attendance during the first half of this meeting. Jessica Hamilton is not available this evening. Edward Hunter. Tiffany Johnson.
Here.
Sarah Kirk.
Here.
Christopher Leonard.
Here.
Jay Middleton.
Here.
And Robert Twillman.
Here.
I note the following staff members are also present. David Fye, the Executive Director of the BSRB.
Here.
And Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director of the BSRB.
I think she unmuted herself just briefly, but she is here as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Richard. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or the KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no time for public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication, allowing members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On January 15th, 2026, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may contact the board office by sending an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I checked it before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone connect to the conference call and introduce themselves, I will let you know.
Thank you, David. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item of the agenda, and that is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve of the agenda?
So moved.
Bob moved. Do I have a second?
I second.
Multiple seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries, and I am still trying to pull up the agenda. I believe the second item is the approval of the minutes, or are we moving directly to our guests?
Actually, Richard, because we have some guests tonight, the next item on the agenda is a presentation by some guests from Texas, and I can go ahead and introduce them if you'd like me to go ahead and do that.
Please go ahead.
Okay, and please feel free to share separate introductions with the committee, but I just wanted to go ahead and introduce two presenters tonight. Robert Romig, who serves as the Deputy Executive Director for the Texas Behavioral Health Executive Council, and also Ryan Bridges, who serves as Chair of the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists in Texas. And the presentation tonight is going to be on the development of an alternative psychology licensure examination. So I'll turn it over to the two of you. Please feel free to share any other information about yourselves. And then thank you for attending the committee and presenting on this topic.
Excellent. Thank you very much for having us this evening. Really appreciate the invitation. I will note the chair of our executive council, John Blamowitz, wished he could be here tonight. He's had a bit of a family issue crop up, and so he sends his best regards. If it is all right, we sent y'all a presentation ahead of time. I've got it pulled up, and I can share my screen for those who are watching remotely. And mostly we want to just talk through where we are on this project and give a little background information about what we are, what the project is and what it isn't, and sort of what the future expectations are for this project. And so we'll just briefly touch on what brought us here, what our goal is, and what our plan is, how we're going to get there. And then mostly we really just want to answer your questions and try to talk through what y'all might wonder about, because we recognize that this is an unusual task in front of us and an unusual project. So I'm going to get started, and then I'll pitch it over to Ryan. Just a little bit about what brought us here. All of you are probably very familiar with the concerns and debate that centered around the EPPP Part 2 skills exam and the rollout of ASPPB. And certainly we were involved in that discussion and debate. We were vigorously opposed to the requirement to have 2 tests. And so a lot of this stems from that debate, but is now really a separate discussion. During that debate, there was lots of discussion about the availability and efficacy of test formats, of the knowledge quest to judge competency based on knowledge versus skills. And with that came lots of information, as we discussed this, about the passage rates of the current exam and of the skills exam. And with that came a lot of various groups that I think had been overlooked over time, who voiced their opinions that they'd really struggled with passing the EPPP, and that maybe it was not the best measure for their groups of competency to practice, and that it was working as a barrier to entry for potentially many folks who we would all wish to be practicing psychologists. For example, the passage rates that ASPPB shared with our board when they came and met back in 2024, so very much outdated numbers at this point, were that particularly for non-accredited programs, there were upwards of more people failing than not of the skills exam. And when you start to talk about those numbers, it really raised the question for us, does one test really fit every situation? We looked at it and said, you know what, in very few areas of our regulation of the practice of psychology do we come to a conclusion that there is one assessment, one tool that must be used by everyone. It seems like in most of our personal experiences, one test does not fit all situations and all people. And it certainly doesn't necessarily fit all regulatory needs. And so that was really the jumping off point for this project, leaving behind the issue of the EPPP itself and the skills test and what that's going to look like as ASPPB really modernizes and goes forward with their project. Really the question was, is there room for another alternative that might benefit folks? And so, Ryan, I'll pitch it over to you to sort of talk through what direction we've been given for this new project.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So appreciate, first off, y'all having us here tonight to talk to you guys about some of what we're doing in Texas. To give you a little background on myself and just provide further context for this, I was first appointed as a public member back in 2018 and was recently appointed chair in 2025 of the Texas board. And part of my charge as a public member is to think about what's in the best public interest. And when part of that is obviously making sure that psychologists are well qualified and are the right people in those spots. But the other side to that is also making sure that we have enough psychologists and that we're not creating artificial barriers to entry that don't have any veracity or that we can't see see under the hood, as it were. And that was the issue that we kept running into when we were presented with the Triple P Part 2, was that we were seeing, as Robert mentioned, these lower passage rates, but then we weren't allowed to see the data that supported it and supported the necessity for it. It was just a mandate that you're going to have to accept this, and we can't bifurcate these exams. You're going to have to take one with the other, even though we won't allow you to see what's under the hood. And so as we had these conversations with ASPPB, this was leading into the 2025 legislative session in Texas, where our legislature tasked us, after we made these arguments, to design an exam on our own. If we don't believe that the product that's currently offered, that's the only one in the marketplace, is meeting the needs of our residents, then we should make our own exam, and to figure out how to do that, figure out if it's even viable. And that's the point that we're at right now, is the viability stage, and doing these meetings with different states to determine, is this viable? What would other states want it to look like? How could we make this a crowdsourced exam to an extent, where we have buy-in and input from other states, so that no one's an island. We don't want to be an island, on our own with this. And that's kind of what led us to the point that we're at now, where we're having these kind of conversations.
Absolutely. And I want to reiterate that it is not a foregone conclusion, neither what the exam will look like, nor that there will be another exam. We're taking a very deliberate approach to see how we get there. What we're looking at is, this is an opportunity to take a step back and say, well, if you were starting from scratch, as we are, what would you like the exam to look like? What should it do? And of course, it's got to have all of the foundational assessment techniques and goals that one expects in a licensure exam. It has to be testing knowledge of the field and competency to practice. But it allows us to ask broader questions about, is a standardized multiple choice test the only format that we should use? Are there other, the EPPP was born in the 1970s. Assessments have come a long way since then. There are many new, not only methods of conducting assessments, but also just technology has changed. And can we leverage that in new ways to test someone's competency to practice? We're asking those questions, and that it really is, as Ryan says, the first step. We are having these sorts of meetings to find out what are people interested in, and what should an exam be focused on testing, and how. So we've sent out a broad survey to the various psychological associations across the country, asking for them to give it to their members to provide input. We're making presentations like this to boards across the country. And then we've conducted a series of work groups with professors from across the country to talk about how they are training competency, and how they understand how you would test that, and then what are the most modern psychometric techniques, and what are the safeguards that need to be in place. We're also going to take all of that information to a technical advisory committee that is made up of folks who are not looking at it from a practice of psychology, but are looking at it purely from the psychometric standpoint of, how do you best create an assessment, and what are the rules that you need to keep and not break, and what are the things that are more flexible and assumptions that we can question, and what are the trade-offs from that. All of that will lead to the only step that we have committed to thus far, which is coming out with essentially a design of an exam, the highlights of what you would request if you went to one of these national testing companies and said, I'd like you to create an occupational licensing exam. Here's what we want it to do and feature and accomplish. And our aim is to have that list for our board's approval at its May meeting this spring. We will then hopefully publish a proposed contract soliciting bids from these sorts of companies this summer to gather the information of how much would it cost, how long would it take, and at that point we will go back to our legislature and we will bring them the information of how much does it cost, how long would it take, and what are we hearing from other states about interest in participation. Are you interested? Would this be a tool that you'd like to have in your toolbox? And it's only at that point that we would commit or not commit to create the exam. And so, Ryan, I'll pitch it to you again to just sort of wrap up, to clear away some of the fog that has, I think, concerns people have had about what we're doing.
There's, as we've had these conversations with different states, and as articles have been written about what we're doing, there's quite a bit of misinformation or mischaracterization of what we're doing. And so, first and foremost, I want to clarify that Texas is going to continue to require the passage of a licensure exam. We are not jettisoning an exam. We are not trying to make the pathway easier for psychologists or for people to get their licensing. What we're doing is creating a possible alternative pathway for licensure. I also want to clarify that we will continue to accept the EPPP. We have no desire and no intent to jettison that. What we're doing is not meant to be a combative step or something where, as I said earlier, we don't want to be on an island. We are going to continue accepting the EPPP and participating in SIPACT. That is a non-negotiable for us. So I just want to restate it again for the record. This is not a replacement that we're doing. We do want to be open to reciprocity with any and all jurisdictions. We would love, and this is part of the push behind having these meetings, we would love for other states to have input on how we develop this exam and what this exam looks like. We would also love for other states to, even if you say today, you know what, we're not interested in participating in this, but we're interested in seeing where this goes, we would love to have reciprocity with other states on this. We want this to be bigger than us. This is not, Texas is leading the way on this, but this is not a Texas exam. We are trying to make this as broadly accepted as possible. So again, just to reiterate one more time, we are not discontinuing recognition of the EPPP. We are not discontinuing our participation in SIPAC. Those are non-negotiables and are separate and apart from what we're doing here today.
Absolutely. So with that, we're really happy to answer any questions. Again, thank you for having us here. As Ryan says, I think our pie in the sky dream would be, at the end of the day, it makes sense and is cost effective to have another exam, and all 50 states and all Canadian provinces accept both the EPPP and this exam, and people just have a choice to, we become the ACT and the SAT, and both are good, and it's just a matter of which one fits your personality better. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen so y'all can see us, and really happy to answer any questions y'all might have about our project.
Robert and Ryan, thank you very much for your presentation. We really appreciate it. And again, are there members who have any questions or comments regarding the presentation this evening.
I'm curious about, what I'm hearing is that you're interested in creating more inclusivity. And are you trying to primarily target people with alternative learning styles, or what is it that you think you're going to capture with this alternate test that you're not capturing now?
So the big question, and in some ways is the same question that ASPPB has grappled with in trying to form their skills exam, is a recognition that testing only knowledge limits the ability to, in some ways, it favors folks who take tests well and are good at recitation and memorization, and it doesn't necessarily test what I think most of what I've heard from our work groups and our input is a desire to really focus on the integration of knowledge across domains and how you apply that in real life situations and real world situations. And so what we are at the moment focused on, and it is admittedly hard, is trying to find a way to incorporate more of those qualitative assessment measures that are adaptive to the person taking the exam to get at how not only can you answer the what diagnosis, but how did you get to that diagnosis and why did you steer toward that diagnosis, and what are your next steps in researching what potential treatment plan you're going to reach, or if you get new information, how are you grappling with that and dealing with that. And so there are certainly going to be, beyond that, committees and thinking about preventing bias and really questioning language choice and language use. We're really interested in having robust accommodations for those with disabilities, as well as hopefully language translation. So that aspect is very much there. But I think what gets more to the heart of your question is trying to get that demonstrable competency that is more than just good test taking.
And if I could dovetail off that as well, an aspect of that for us has been complete transparency through this process. And part of that extends to any data that we get out of, if this gets off the ground and we start getting data, we want to be open about those aspects of it. One of our issues going back to the PPP2 and where this started was that when we asked to see the data that supported some of the decisions that were made around it, I get it. ASPPB owns their exam. It's their proprietary material. I understand that. But for our part of it, we want to be as transparent as we can so that if anybody has questions about the validity or the effectiveness of the exam, we want to be able to share that and just be as open as we can with everyone.
I have a question regarding the surveying of professors across the country. We have a number of members on this committee that are involved in training of students and that are in academic institutions. I'm wondering what, if you have this information, what might training directors and directors of clinical training might be saying about the prospect of the introduction of a second examination in Texas and, as you're laying it out, beyond.
So there's certainly what we've heard. There's certainly the biggest concern everyone has raised, which we are absolutely wanting to address, is reciprocity. Is how is this going to relate to somebody who goes to school in Kansas and is taking the test, but then decides to move to Texas, or vice versa, and wanting that uniform experience and assurance of competency. And so that's certainly one big feature. But I think from the training standpoint, for one thing, I want to make sure it's clear, we're not suggesting multiple tests. We're just suggesting it's an alternative. You could choose to take the EPPP or this one. But what we're hearing from the professors that have joined us they're the ones that have been most vocal about the downplaying of an assessment of knowledge, or at least that there's been too much emphasis on assessing psychological knowledge, particularly as they say, look, we're training these folks in accredited PhD programs. They've passed their comps. They've done their dissertation. They've done all the work. Why in the world do you think our assessment of their knowledge is not good enough? Aren't you concerned more about, from a regulatory perspective, their competency to practice before the public? And so there's been a lot more stress on transitioning that assessment away from just academic knowledge into public safety and ethics and clinical approaches. That is the message we're hearing loud and clear, I think, from professors.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer. Anyone else have any questions? Or Chris, please.
So I might have missed this, but will you be also reaching out to APA accredited training internship sites and talking to the training directors on at the internship sites as well, outside of just professors from the training program?
Yes, so we sent our survey out. One of the groups that we sent it out to, and I'm going to mess up their acronym, but was the Association of Clinical Training Directors, to send out to their folks, and we got responses that way. One of our board members is a clinical training director, and so is in touch with that group and bringing that knowledge. So I will say there's sort of three places that we will be getting feedback, not only from them, but from everyone. This first one, which we are somewhat coming to the tail end of, is just input on what should the focus of an exam be. That first sort of set of questions of what are our goals with this exam. Certainly we welcome any input that y'all or others might still have about that question. Once we get to the point, which would be a year from now, if the legislature funds the project to actually start developing the exam, then we would have a big reach out to start getting folks involved in the actual construction of the test, doing the job task analysis, analyzing the results, coming up with questions and domains, and then questions for the domains. And that we would absolutely want a wide variety of participation from clinical practitioners across the country, but also training directors and professors to really get that feel. And then at the end of the day, one of the things unique to the training directors is we are very mindful of the support and materials that need to happen for students to get ready for the exam. And so one of the things we're particularly interested in, if we create this exam, is then having a work group or some way to get those clinical directors to talk about what kind of practice exams, what kind of supportive materials do we need to create, and then to integrate that into those training programs so that they're not coming out of their program and then having to cram for an exam that didn't match their training experience.
Sorry to dovetail on that as well, from what Robert was just saying. To underscore, this is obviously a very long process that we're going through. For some context, the Texas legislature meets every 2 years and odd number years. So we started having these conversations in 2024. Legislature met in 2025. We're working, as you see right now, through 2026, and then going to the legislature for round 2 in 2027. So this is we're thinking very long term with this project, which is, this is the first time this has been attempted in 60 years. So it deserves that kind of time.
Maybe one last question that I would ask in terms of any data that you would like collected from our jurisdiction, would you want would you want something formal from the licensing from the BSRB and something formal from the Kansas Psychological Association, or would it be informal feedback if we took a poll or something like that? What would you want or need from this body and more broadly this jurisdiction when it comes to the leveling of an opinion or opinions regarding the construction of this proposed examination?
Yes to all of that. So we would love, I'd say the particular vital pieces of information. One would be if there are Kansas statute or regulatory provisions that an exam would have to meet. We would like to know that ahead of time. We certainly don't want to put in all the effort to create an exam and then I show it to David and David says, "Well, that's beautiful and all, but that'd be illegal in Kansas. You can't do that." So, if there are any particular assessment standards that we need to meet or clearances we'd need to get, that would be helpful to hear. Beyond that, I'd say if there are any particular priorities that you as a board have, we would love to hear those in a formal response. But we would love any sort of informal feedback as well. We really are asking for advice from the greater psychology community. If you have thoughts, we have taken thoughts from staff in Minnesota to board members in Florida and around in between, so if you have an idea about, if I were king or queen for the day and I could make this exam, I really wish it did more of this or less of this. I wish it offered this kind of retake or this kind of score analysis. Or I think what is really the biggest barrier when people take this exam is this. Anything like that, we are all ears because we do feel like the folks who have taken these exams previously and y'all who have seen so many come through your doors um, asking for a license, you have the anecdotes that will help us make sure this is a better exam.
Can I just ask a question about one of your slides? So it was the EPPP passage rates, and it just doesn't map on to the PhD clinical programs. I review that data regularly because I'm in a PhD clinical program. So what does accredited, non-accredited mean? And did you lump all programs in together for this data?
Yes, so this was a slide that was provided to us by ASPPB, though again back in April of 2024. And so my understanding of it was that they lumped all accredited programs and all non-accredited programs across the country together, and were showing us the overall passage rate on first, second, and third attempt, broken down by those categories.
Okay. And then do you know, because I didn't see a slide regarding this, is this a change or difference, or is this fairly stable over time?
At the time, I know the EPPP, the Part 2 exam was still fairly new at that time. So I know they had a relatively smaller sample. So I would expect that those numbers to change, though I honestly don't know which direction. But I have no reason to think that the EPPP Part 1 numbers were an outlier or unusual. They certainly, I'm trying to remember back to that meeting, and they did not indicate that it was an outlier or unusual at the time.
Thanks.
We meet every other month on the even number. So it's February now, and we will meet again in April as an advisory committee. And if I'm remembering correctly, you all are going to go before the Texas legislature in May, or you're going to try.
So we'll be taking this to our board for their board meeting for a vote in May. Again, just on sort of a set of here's what our wish list is. So that will be the next step.
Okay. And the legislature itself meets next
They
year in
won't
2027.
exactly. They won't meet until January. So
Okay. So
plenty of time.
we have plenty of time to get back to you on something potentially formal from either this committee or the BSRB as a whole.
Of course, of course. And we are, one thing I should have said at the beginning, we are not asking anyone to sign a dotted line either. You know, it is something you can be interested in and provide us feedback and suggest this is what we would like. And you're not beholden in any way. If at the end of the day we don't produce something you think is valuable, then we wouldn't expect you to adopt it. So we no strings attached to any feedback you give at this point.
Oh, thank you very much. That being said, I recognize that we're at 6:40 and we've got an hour and 20 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, please forward them to myself or to Dave, and we could forward those questions on to the folks in Texas that are doing this. Thank you all very much for your time tonight, Robert and Ryan, and you will I'm sure you'll hear something back from us over the course of the next several months.
Again, really appreciate it.
Y'all have a wonderful evening. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, you as well.
Thank you.
Okay, with that being said, I'd like to move us to our next item on the agenda. Excuse me, and that's a review and approval of the minutes from our last advisory committee meeting. And you all received the minutes from the 6th of January before tonight's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve of the minutes from last meeting?
Motion to approve.
I have Sarah as moving. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Bob, I heard him first. Any discussion on the minutes or any changes that need to take place? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of approving of the minutes, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries and the minutes are approved. I'll now move us on to our next item on the agenda, and that is the executive director's report. Dave, please.
Thank you, Richard. And every advisory committee meeting, I generally focus a lot of this, my report on BSRB operations. And while we are still working very hard to license individuals and take care of the other regulatory responsibilities for the agency, one of the other items I provide you is legislative updates. And we are very heavily into the legislative session. So I'll start with the legislative updates right now. Basically, each session, the legislature meets in Kansas from about January for about 90 days. And that lasts sometimes through the end of March into April, sometimes into May. I've seen it go as late as June, but we are very much right in the middle of the legislative session this year. They are moving very fast. One of the two items for the BSRB is that as a state agency, we provide a proposed budget for the legislature. We send that to the governor's office for review by October 1st. We really send it in around September 15th so that their division of the budget can review that. The governor's office can make recommendations. That is also shared with the legislature at that time. And historically, what has happened during the budget process is that the agencies submit revised budget estimates. If they're agencies that are funded by the state, they asked for money for certain reasons. If they are fee funded, like the BSRB, they ask the legislature to set a limit in terms of how much they can spend in any year. So we provided a limit on expenditures based on our projected cost and revenue coming in. The legislature is taking a different approach to the budget cycle, and they started this process last year. Rather than use the governor's recommendation as the starting point, the legislature this past fall held budget committee meetings and reviewed some of the early submissions for budgets from agencies and had an interim committee make recommendations as an interim committee. But then when the legislative session started, they went ahead and started having budget committees meet very, very early in January. In fact, they approved some budget committees to meet before the first week of the legislative session. And those committees focused on smaller agencies, including the BSRB. So I presented their agency's revised budget estimate that was towards the House Higher Education Budget Committee. The first week that the session began, that committee met again and made recommendations. And we had requested limitations that were at the same amounts approved by last year's legislature, with one technical correction in fiscal year 2027, which is consistent for all small agencies. And the legislature in that budget committee approved our revised estimate that went to the House Appropriations Committee. The chair of the Higher Education Budget Committee reported out our budget committee and their committee's recommendation, and the House Appropriations Committee confirmed that recommendation with no changes. So our budget is ready to be included in the overall appropriations bill for the legislature. This week, the House Appropriations Committee is scheduled to, it's called working the bill. So what that means is House Appropriations will open the bill up for any members of the committee to add any possible amendments. And then ultimately they will close those bill hearings. Well, actually, they've had a hearing. This is a separate session working the bill. And then ultimately they will take all those changes and put it into a bill that will rerun across the House floor. And the Senate this same week, and the Senate Ways and Means Committee is also working their version of their budget bill. The reason I didn't talk about a budget committee for the Senate is because after the House had their budget committees meet, the Senate basically said, you know, for agencies that requested amounts at the same amount that was approved by last year's legislature, most of those committees will not have a formal budget hearing. So the BSRB is not scheduled to have a budget hearing on the Senate side. And some of those other committees did receive hearings, but the Senate Ways and Means Committee is currently working their version of the bill as well. So what will happen is the House will run their budget bill on their floor, the Senate will run their budget bill on their floor. Then leadership of both committees will form a conference committee, resolve the items of difference, and then that compromise bill by both chambers will be asked to be run across both chambers' floor. Usually this happens sometime in late March, maybe even towards the very end of session. So we are moving at a very fast pace. And so, but this is all happening now. And so if you are interested in watching those proceedings, that's what's going on in the appropriations committees. When we were talking in the fall as an advisory committee, we talked a little bit about the BSRB considering certain aspects and possibly requesting introduction of a bill to make some statutory changes. Ultimately, based on what we were hearing as far as the pace of the legislative session and then moving very quickly, the board decided not to introduce legislation or request legislation this year. So we are trying to really focus on making some positive changes otherwise. We are open to continuing conversations and possibly requesting a bill in future sessions, but the board did not request a bill this session. However, we are monitoring legislation that is relevant to the professions regulated by the board. And to that end, I just kind of want to make you aware of a few bills that have been discussed, some that are currently having hearings, some that have already had hearings. This is the second year of something called a biennium. And what that means is the legislature usually holds 2-year sessions. And so unless there is a technical reason that a bill would, we call it dying, but if a bill does not technically die, if it was introduced last year, it would still be available for the legislature to take action on this year. But the legislature also will introduce new bills. And so there are a handful of bills relevant to the board that are still available. If we have any movement on those, I'll let you know. But as far as new bills that were introduced this year, one of those for a different profession was House Bill 2506, which would create a new level of licensure for the addiction counseling profession. It would create something called an apprentice addiction counselor. And when that bill was requested for introduction, we started meeting with the advocates for the bill They really want to think creatively about addressing workforce, but the proposal in the bill doesn't really match our licensure structure, and there are concerns regarding the lack of educational and training requirements for the scope of practice identified in the bill. And so we've really been working with the advocates to come to an understanding if we can explore some other possible options. And so we've met several times with them and worked with the chair of the committee that it was introduced in, and the chair, Will Carpenter, Representative Will Carpenter, is allowing us to continue to work on those items. And so we will continue to work on those over the course of the next year. But in the calendar for the House, there is scheduled to have a hearing on that bill, House Bill 2506, tomorrow. But in talking to individuals behind the scenes, we will be proceeding differently, working with those advocates rather than the bill hearing going forward. In terms of some of the other bills that were introduced this year, on Monday of this week, the House Legislative Modernization Committee had a hearing on House Bill 2592, which would create the Kansas Task Force on Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technologies. And that task force would study technologies and make recommendations to the legislature. So given our discussion about AI, I thought you might find that interesting. That is House Bill 2592, and it was heard yesterday in the House Legislative Modernizing Committee. Also yesterday in the Senate Fed and State Committee, there was a hearing on Senate Bill 405, which would make it unlawful for a person to knowingly train AI to encourage or support suicide or the unlawful killing of a person, provide emotional support, develop emotional relationships, act as a healthcare professional, or simulate humans or encourage isolation. So again, that bill is House Bill 405, and that was heard in the Senate Fed and State Committee yesterday. House Bill 2639 has to do with juvenile crisis intervention centers. It would involve changing the name and modifying the intake criteria and treatment provided at such centers. If you are curious what the legislature is doing in regarding the topic of DEI, the House Education Committee on Wednesday has scheduled to work House Bill 2428. And what House Bill 2428 would do is it would require the State Board of Regents to establish curricula and designate courses at post-secondary educational institutions relating to DEI-CRT related courses and content, and requiring the study of American institutions and certain programs at freshman orientation concerning free speech. So again, that was House Bill 2428, and that is to receive, it's actually had a hearing already. It is scheduled to be worked by the House Education Committee tomorrow at 1:30. A few other bills of interest. House Bill 2352 was introduced this year. It would require a duly ordained minister of religion to report certain abuse and neglect, except when the reporting would violate the penitential communication privilege and require training. And that bill was originally scheduled for a hearing back on January 26th. The hearing was moved to January 28th, but then it was canceled. I haven't heard of any further movement on that, but I found that bill somewhat interesting. That again was House Bill 2352. House Bill 2420 would require parental consent prior to the provision of any school-based mental health service to a student. It was introduced by Representative Steele, and it was referred to the Committee on Education. It had a hearing back on January 22nd, and then the House Education Committee amended the bill and voted it out favorably for passage on February 3rd. Just a couple more notes on legislation. There is a bill, House Bill 2528, and while this is focused on a different agency, it's focused on some of the actions by the State Board of Nursing, and it would deal with some of their responsibilities relating to disciplinary complaints and some of their other procedures for that agency. So We are monitoring that because it could be potentially extended to other regulatory boards. So we are monitoring what's going on at the legislature. There is also a bill that is very similar to a bill that was introduced last session. It would essentially create a House Bill 2480. And House Bill 2480 would create an exception to certain mandatory reporting obligations for licensed social workers when they're working under the supervision of an attorney. And it would also permit an attorney to require a licensed social worker to keep ethical obligations of attorney-client privilege while working under the supervision of an attorney. And a version of that bill was introduced last year. It was passed favorably out of committee following a hearing, but it died on a legislative calendar. So this year, House Bill 2480 was introduced, which is very similar to last year's bill. It did get a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee on January 28th, or at least it was scheduled for a hearing, and then that hearing was moved to February 4th. So again, that is House Bill 2480. And while that is a different profession, I think it is possible that, they could be looking to other professions to include as far as extending that defense for mandatory reporting. But that bill is attempting to resolve a conflict of law currently. So I covered a lot of possible bills of interest. Just want to make sure that you all were aware of those legislative bills. If you have questions about them, please let me know. I'll transition now to just a couple items from the most recent board meetings. I do try to keep you updated on action from board meetings. The board last met as a full board meeting on January 12th. One of the items relevant for your committee, you had a couple of recommendations forwarded to the board, and one of them was a review of some changes to regulations that we had walked through as a committee. I wanted to let you know that all of the regulations that were forwarded to the board with changes were recommended to be moved forward by the board. So those included KAR 102-1- or KAR 102-1-3A, 8, 8A, 11, 14, and 18. So those were moved forward by the board. There was also a recommendation forwarded to express public comment and support of the proposed SIPAC rule, capping the yearly assessment fee charged to states. And so the board did recommend us making public comment on behalf of the advisory committee and the profession. And so we did provide comment on that rule. And so I provided comment consistent with what the advisory committee had talked about in terms of capping the fee. I also provided a note on there that the committee did not take a position or did not express any favor concerning, if there was any interest in increasing the amount of the assessment that currently applies to states, because that is one of the items covered in some of those sections of the bill. So that is something that was a little outside of our conversation, but we hope this provides flexibility without further impacting or burdening states. The board also talked a little bit at the board meeting about developing a strategic plan for the BSRB. That is something the board decided to focus on in the fall, is putting together a multi-year strategic plan for the agency. So they asked members to think about items for a SWOT analysis at the next meeting in March. And then one last comment, because of the introduction of that addiction counseling bill that I referenced, House Bill 2506, we were able to have a short board meeting on Tuesday, January 27th, which was going to be right before the initial hearing on that bill. The board was able to meet. The board did express concerns regarding the topics that I discussed: the lack of educational requirements, lack of training, the scope of practice for individuals without those competencies. And so the board asked me to provide opponent testimony to the bill. So I drafted that, submitted that. That testimony may never move forward if the bill does not receive a hearing this year, but I wanted you to know that the board did take that position on the bill. And the board did express positive comments about wanting to work with groups to assist in further workforce development, but wanting to do that in a way that would not endanger the public, to make sure that there were good checkpoints and measurable competencies to make sure that practitioners are meeting those standards. So with that, I'll wrap up my report and see if there's any questions on any of the legislative items I talked about or any of the items from the past board meetings.
Thank
I
you,
didn't
Dave.
catch the, oh, sorry.
No, please, Tiffany, go ahead.
No, I didn't catch, what was the House bill number on the parental consent bill?
That would be House Bill 2420. House Bill 2420 would require parental consent prior to the provision of any school-based mental health service to a student. And I believe the House Education Committee voted that bill out of committee favorably for passage with some amendments on January 3rd.
Could you go back, please, to the House bill that related to DEI? What number was that? And could you explain again what the summary of the bill is?
Sure. Yes. So that is House Bill 2428. And the printed description of House Bill 2428 states that it would require the State Board of Regents to establish curricula and designate courses at post-secondary educational institutions relating to DEI/CRT related courses and content. And it would require the study of American institutions and certain programs at freshman orientations concerning free speech. So I am not very familiar with that bill, but I did hear certain individuals say publicly at committee meetings that that was one of the approaches legislature would be taking to that topic this year, rather than focus on, well, they would be taking sort of an approach dealing with higher education when it came to the topic of DEI. And so I think that may have been that bill. So.
And that's only applicable to undergraduate institutions or community colleges, like 4-year and 2-year colleges in the state.
I'm not 100% sure. The description just references courses at post-secondary educational institutions.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else have any questions about for Dave with respect to his report?
And I forgot to mention this earlier. If anyone is interested in following the legislative process, it moves very quickly this time of year, so it is challenging. But if you go to the legislature's website, there are a couple of tools that are helpful. One of those tools is the House and Senate on a daily basis publish a calendar. And if you pull up that calendar, it's a little drop down. So if you go to the legislature's website, if you look at the toolbar on the top of the screen, you can hover and it will allow you to select the House calendar or the Senate calendar. And if you pull that up on any specific day, it will basically say all the different committees that are going to be meeting that day. It's organized by time in the calendar of when those committees meet. And then it will give a multi-year or multi-day schedule. So it'll say what the schedule is going to be for the following day and then through the end of the week. And so usually those come out in the evenings for the next day. So if you are tracking a bill or you're wanting to know what's going on in the Capitol any day, you can follow it that way. And then also, I know many people cannot be at the State House very often because of other responsibilities. The legislature does have a pretty good YouTube channel. They broadcast those hearings, and when they work bills, those are all live. And they're also available archived. So you can go to their YouTube channel and you can catch portions of meetings if you want to go back and hear conversation on a bill or see what happened. So you can use those calendars as a nice way to figure out what happened on which day, and then the YouTube channel to go back and follow the conversation.
Thank you for that, Dave. And I just wish to express continued thanks to you for your following of the legislature and the items that come up that relate to the BSRB as a whole, and as well as to SIPAC in specifically. I really appreciate you following the bill that may not be taken up this session with respect to the establishment of new licenses for the LACs. I very much appreciate you continuing to be watchful when it comes to all those items and especially that bill.
Thank you, Richard.
You're very welcome. I'll move us on to old business. We have a couple of items here to discuss. Let's take them one by one and start with the continued discussion and review of the survey of licensees. And Dave, I'll have you take it away from there.
Okay, great. So we have gone through as a committee now. A lot of the advisory committees are kind of at the same pace. We had the survey of licensees last year. As an advisory committee, you've had the opportunity to work through a couple questions per meeting, being able to look through the summary information, the open answer responses. You've largely completed your review. And so at this point, we just wanted to bring the topic back to the advisory committee and say, now that you've had a chance to look through the report and given it a chance to breathe, the information we have in this report is really good information and it's really good data. And just wanted to open it up for any discussion from you if you had any further thoughts of any topics from the report that you may want us to look at more closely in 2026, or anything from the survey that you'd like to use for other direction from the advisory committee this year. And if not, that's okay. The information will be available and it's out there. But now that we've completed most of our review of the report, just wanted to give you another opportunity to any last thoughts on the report. It will still be posted on our website, so individuals can still go back and look at it. But I do want to thank all of you for not only providing the feedback in terms of the survey responses, but also walking through it as a committee. I think that's been really valuable to be able to examine the information there.
Something that for the committee, something that Dave and I had discussed was developing possible regulations or changes to regulations around topics that were addressed in the survey. And what I would invite members to do over the course of maybe the next several months is to reread the report and contemplate if there are any particular matters that stood out to you that might be approached in regulation or revised in regulation, or if it reaches the statutory level, that's a whole different process. But if there are particular matters that are discussed related to laws, I would certainly want to bring that before the committee for further discussion and seeing if there may be particular changes that would be made to either regulation or rules. And Dave, am I characterizing that part of our conversation correctly?
Yes. Yeah. And the regulations are an area that we have a bit more control over, and our time frame is not the same. The statutory changes do require a bill to be introduced, and a lot of the legislation can change. And so the regulatory approach is more helpful if we can change things that way. And it can also be done maybe more quickly depending upon what time of the year it is too.
And so your suggestion is to look at it with an eye towards what could be changed in regulation, because it's my understanding that right now there's the potential for unintended consequences if we introduced statutory changes. And so we refrained from introducing any of those this legislative term, correct?
Yes. We've brought forward things in the past, and some of the items the board was very interested in changing were removed from the bill, and so we weren't able to advance some of those in the past. Sometimes things got added that the board was very much opposed to in the bill the board had put forward, and sometimes things are just modified in a way that's inconsistent with what the board had in mind. So with regulatory changes, we would still put it out for public comment. We'd still be receptive to a lot of the feedback that we could get, but we have a lot more control over the time frame and what the possible change would be if we do it through regulations.
Any other questions or thoughts or comments on this matter? That being said, again, I encourage you all to go back through the document and see if there may be matters that you would like to see introduced with respect to regulation, especially because that is a bit of an easier process to get through, and we can go from there. I'll move us to the second item under old business, and that is a continued discussion on the regulation of artificial intelligence. Dave, please.
Thank you, Richard. At the last meeting, I provided a little bit of extra material, and we've had this topic on the agenda for a few meetings now as we've studied this area. And at the last meeting, I think I provided a handout that covered a summary of some laws that were changed in terms of regulation of artificial intelligence. One of those was a law in Illinois, one was in Nevada, and one was in Utah. And so there was also a report from a governmental entity in Utah that was focused specifically at artificial intelligence utilization by mental health practitioners. So I did want to circle back around to see if you had any additional thoughts. I think you received that not too long before the last meeting. So if you had any comments after reading those materials, wanted to open it up for that. And then also, now that we've gone through the survey information on artificial intelligence and have studied this topic in a few different ways, if you are ready as a committee to discuss a possible recommendation back to the board in this topic area, you could have that discussion as well. There's a few different items that a few of the other advisory committees have somewhat come to a consensus on. So if you are wanting to have a discussion on the overall topic of regulation of artificial intelligence, I could make you aware of what some of the other committees are talking about. And of course, you could have different recommendations, or you could add to those recommendations or not support the recommendations. But I'd be happy to start to facilitate that conversation if you're ready to have that.
I would like to hear a bit more about what other advisory committees are discussing or what they've proposed. And I think going back to a discussion that you and I had, Dave, what have other states in terms of the implementation of regulation or statutory language, what have been kind of consensus sorts of regulations or statutes that have been passed around AI?
So in terms of other states, I don't know that there is a consensus yet between states in terms of uniform laws. I think, some states have been very proactive, but only a handful. I think Utah is a really good example of a state that has approached this over the last few years. Some states are just to the point to where they're trying to put in some protections in terms of regulation of artificial intelligence. I think in terms of a discussion, we're probably ahead of a lot of states that are just starting to have this conversation. But I don't know that I could really talk as far as consensus. I would say that bill, that it is very intriguing to me. I haven't had a chance to really listen to the conversation or go back and study that bill very closely, but it's the bill that focused on prohibiting certain kind of utilization of artificial intelligence when it came to Senate Bill 405. So there's also House Bill 2592. House Bill 2592 would make the Kansas Task Force on Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technologies, and it would study the technology and make recommendations to the legislature. That's more of a broad type bill. But Senate Bill 405 would make it unlawful for a person to knowingly train artificial intelligence to encourage or support suicide. or the unlawful killing of a person, provide emotional support, develop emotional relationships, act as a healthcare professional, or simulate human or encourage isolation. So I think that bill is worth tracking, Senate Bill 405. In terms of what the other advisory committees have talked about in terms of a starting point for, recommendations, it seems like most of the advisory committees have focused on three main areas. The first area is if you are utilizing artificial intelligence in your practice, you should be providing informed consent to your clients that you are using it. And then also, you should provide informed consent in which ways you are using it that would involve client care. Because there has been a distinction, you may not need to inform someone that you're using it for marketing purposes or something to do with your facility website or something like that. But as it relates to client care, making your clients aware with an informed consent that you're using it and in what ways you're using it as it relates to client care. That was the first area. The second area is if you're utilizing artificial intelligence, you need to make sure that items that are intended to be confidential are kept confidential. So you need to be mindful about that as it relates to AI and technology. And then the third area of focus, which doesn't have uniform consensus support, but a lot of the committees are in favor of this, is that if you are utilizing artificial intelligence, there would be the option for clients to opt out of artificial intelligence being used for their care. So informed consent, specifically how you're using it, relating to client care, making sure if you're using it that you're keeping confidential information confidential. And then last, if you're using it, provide an ability for clients to opt out of the utilization of AI in terms of care.
Anyone have any thoughts about the previous discussions as well as the prompts that Dave has provided us with when it comes to other advisory committees and their discussions around the use of AI?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier today because I was talking to one of the social workers who I supervise, and I became aware. I mean, I guess I already knew this, but it just hadn't really clicked that we have the capability, our institution, to have AI basically listen into our sessions and generate session notes for us. And I don't know that that's included in any of our consent forms. I'm going to have to check on that tomorrow. But it seems to me like that's an absolute requirement, is that there be some sort of informed consent for that. And I agree that the patient should be able to opt out of that. So it's not just plugging in test scores and having it generate a report. It goes all the way to listening in on the sessions, which personally, it's a little creepy to me, but that's where we are.
That was actually one of my questions, actually, Bob, for you, Richard, Linda, that are in medical center environments, because I know KU Med is already using AI tools with medical practice. So what kind of practices are they putting in place? My assumption, Bob, is that there is informed consent, but that might be a faulty assumption.
Anybody want to take it away? Because I have a quick thought or a quick response to Sarah in my workings with KU. But anyone
Yeah,
else?
I had some discussions with the privacy officer, and he is the privacy officer for both campuses, KUMC and KU Lawrence. And so he was discussing some of the medical practice, but none of the psychological clinics are currently using those tools, at least not here on the main campus. So he talked about some of the limitations, some of the concerns. He didn't give us any specific direction, but so I was just curious what's happening on the medical side.
Well,
Yeah. Oh, Linda, please.
Yeah, so I know that just like you said, that it's used much more on the medical side than it is on the psychological side. I know in I don't remember any conversation about active consent for the use of AI generated notes, which would assume that they would be privy to what was being said. I know there are, outside of K Med Center, I know that there are some practices or some software that will look at the data or the what you put in general, and it will generate a SOAP note for documentation for the insurance company. So they're not actively in the session, but now that we're talking about it, what do you know, Richard? What have you
So,
heard?
and I just wrote down a note to myself to check in with the neuropsychologist about this, because I think that they would, when it comes to psychological testing and assessment, they would have more input as to what's going on when it comes to that. But all that being said, in my clinic, I don't have access to the use of a health chat GPT or something like that to construct notes or anything. I don't think that there's anything that's listening in on sessions through the through eCare or through the EHR. And I have not been alerted or informed about any informed consents that have been drawn up when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence in the psychological space. So that's to your point, Linda, about there may be things that are going on when it comes to the medical side, but they may not be going on when it comes to the psychological side or the neuropsychological side of things.
Right. I know at the DDBS, the Division of Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics, I know it came up at one of the faculty meetings, and then it was discussed in our division meeting. And I let them know that, that we were actively talking about it as a board, but that, we were just looking at what other states had put into practice or put into law. So they're very interested in it, which doesn't answer the question, is there active consent, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, that's gonna have to be something now that I go back and look at.
I agree with Bob. I think that
Creepy.
yeah, I think that it would be really important to include something about active consent, and the having the client or the patient have optionality when it comes to not having AI be present or be assisting in the construction of notes. And I might add, because psychologists are unique when it comes to the use of psychological and neuropsychological assessments, that the production of reports, that I think is something else that we need to be considerate of when it comes to the regulation of AI. And I just want to recognize the presence of Matthew Gelker, who's come to the meeting. Welcome, Matt. Um, those are just my 2 cents, and I want to open it up to others when it comes to this matter.
We're starting to use AI at the VA. In the VA system, we've been given permission to start kind of playing with it. VA has its own version of ChatGPT. And so what a lot of the clinicians are doing is using ambient dictation within Word, Microsoft Word, and then using that transcription to plug into the VA GPT system, which then generates a note. So there are folks starting to play with it, but nobody would be doing that without getting consent from the veteran first. So that's definitely happening. And then the other thing I would say as well is I'm in private practice on the side, and I'm using Simple Practice. And that has a built-in transcription and note-taking system that I've been using for about, I would say, 4 months now. And that's going very well. And our practice has forms that we use to get consent from the patient, both to record the session and then, pardon me, the dog always starts to bark when I start talking, sorry. And so the client gives permission to be recorded, and then also separately gives permission for us to use that recording to generate a progress note. But what then happens is the dictation, the transcription is erased as soon as the note is signed. That's how it works in simple practice. But all of that is only by consent, and the clients always have the option to opt out.
Jennifer, could you quickly repeat what you said about what the VA is doing? Like, it sounds like it's going from Word to the EHR and in the VA, and that produces the note. So there would be kind of two steps with the VA.
In the VA, well, people are just toying with the system right now. So it's in sort of like beta testing. There's no official way that this is being done in the VA.
Okay.
But the people that are playing with it are using Microsoft Word and the ambient dictation function within that program. And then they are using that transcription and plugging it into VA's version of ChatGPT. And then that, once the progress note is generated, that is copy and pasted into our electronic medical record system. So it's really like 3 steps.
And
Anyone? Oh, Bob, please.
are there any safeguards in these systems against retaining any of that information that gets put in there? I mean, is there a guarantee it gets wiped out as soon as the note's generated?
I've sat in on a couple of, well, I can speak to simple practice, which is what I'm using. And I have sat in on a couple of meetings with the IT staff who have assured that this whole system is HIPAA compliant. They've gone through a lot of certifications in order to be able to introduce this system. And so they have assured us that as soon as our notes are signed, that transcription is deleted. It is not saved in the cloud, nothing. And so I feel pretty confident. I don't know if anybody else here uses simple practice. I think I've heard a few people that do.
I do. I will offer that I also raked the simple practice people over the coals about the reliability of the information. Because it was both like, well, the privacy of it, as well as how do I know that you're not just data farming me to figure out how to make better AI therapists, basically? I'll be the paranoid one. And essentially they were like, well, because we don't. And the way I kind of ultimately got to it was, I also have a cloud-based EMR, and how do they not release that information in a data breach? Because they don't. I don't really have any more reliance than that, if I'm honest.
Yeah, just trust us, right?
Right, exactly.
I would just add, similar to simple practice, so I have some experience with therapy notes, and it also has a built-in AI. There's a couple of different options that clinicians at the practice that I'm connected with, that it can listen in on the sessions. As has been mentioned, I have thoughts about that. I don't use that feature. But the other one is a progress note, SOAP note generator, that you type in a few sentence summary, and it will generate the note for you. And the note disappears from the chart once that note is signed, where you can't see it. Now, as far as this question about, the safeguards about, is that actually gone? I don't, from my understanding, it is. You can't see it in the chart. But all of this is also with client consent, and there's a consent form that they complete, as long as they are okay with having AI used, or they cannot sign it and opt out of that.
The way that the conversation is going, it sounds like there's relative consensus with respect to having some regulation put in around the consent process and the optionality feature that a client can opt out of having AI be used in the progress note writing process and those sorts of things. Am I reading the room correctly, or is there any dissent regarding that? So taking that into account, with respect to point B, that has to do with confidentiality in AI. Dave, can you could you repeat what was said or what has been kind of tossed around in other committees with respect to confidentiality?
Yeah, and I think the official language will probably read differently. But the concept is if you're utilizing artificial intelligence, you need to be mindful of making sure that confidential information continues to stay confidential. So, but basically putting a focus on the responsibility to maintain confidential information appropriately. And so that was one of the recommendations.
And that kind of gets to points made by Matt and by Daniel when it comes to, well, they say that the node, or they say that the information is erased, and how can we safeguard? How can we be sure that the information has been erased? And to Matt's good point, they say, well, just kind of trust us on this matter.
In electronics, nothing's ever erased, right? I mean, you can try to erase your hard drive, but the data are still there.
What they talk about, and I'm a psychologist, not an IT guy, so I think that's part of both the where you just sort of, and I actually pulled up on my other screen here the simple practice security page where they talk about it, and it talks like you're talking to a therapist that's not an IT person. Built for compliance. We don't just say we're secure, we prove it. HIPAA compliance and in all caps, high trust certification. No idea what that means. Mean your practice meets the gold standard of EHR privacy and security. And then there's a nice picture of a person who's looking at their computer with a big thing that says data encrypted. I don't know what any of this means.
Yeah, for me, I think my biggest thing is the fine print. Like, are these companies putting anything in their fine print that they're not responsible if something gets found, and if that they're not really in the ball game of protecting their data, So that's kind of my thing. Like hospitals, you're going to be responsible for if one of these companies get a leak, and they're going to say, well, you signed a contract that said we still weren't responsible for this. So that's my big thing. Fine print.
I'm on the still on the same page. I went to the business associate agreement, the BAA that you signed to use it, and in there they go. That's where they're basically identifying their liabilities, and so I think your BAA agreement is probably what's going to dictate really who's got liability at what point. But I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah. So for me, if that's solid, then I think that's us saying they think they're going to be responsible, so they gotta protect the data too. So
I think one of the things that I think about with that confidentiality point too, kind of going along with this, is I've seen some of these standalone programs that you put in information to create a note versus these AI programs that are associated with an EHR. Because personally, I feel like the ones that are associated with an EHR, those are in theory already protected, HIPAA compliant. We're entering documentation and notes into that. My question and concern, certainly with the confidentiality part, involves more of those standalone programs that you then copy into the medical record.
That's a really good point. I had not considered, because there are a number of these standalone programs that you're talking about, and I guess that would, going back a couple of points, that would the what you would abide when it comes to the matters of confidentiality. It seems like it would then go back to that BAA that you hold with that company. So then you would need to be well versed in your BAAs, and I'm sure that all of you read them, to the letter, because they are so wonderful to read. But less facetiously, like, we would have to be really aware of what the BAAs say And I don't know if, tonight we are ready to execute anything on this second point, because this one, to me at least, it seems really thorny and would need to be kind of raked through with a finer tooth comb.
Yeah, those BAAs are great treatments for insomnia, but it makes me wonder what kind of BAA there is with Microsoft that allows people to use Word.
That is a very good point. That's a very good question. So my thought is that, there's concurrence with other advisory committees with respect to items 1 and 3, and the second item we can spend more time on in discussing matters related to confidentiality. Is there any objection uh, to the way in which I'm kind of laying things out and potentially proceeding?
I think the only thing I would add maybe to the beginning part is how are we defining clinical practice versus not? I think if you do a Google search and you look at the search results, you've already engaged in AI because most of them have. And that's just as long as we're really talking, client care, putting client information in, informed consent, 100% on board with that. Kind of what David was saying about marketing information or, writing an email and, doing something like that that's not related to client care. I don't know if that really needs informed consent. That would be my stance on that. But anything with a client, informed consent, hands down. So.
I would also add to this a potential discussion around psychological reports or neuropsychological reports and uh, the s- the specific matters that come up with report writing, um, and the use of AI technology to produce reports. Maybe not with much original writing. I might put it that way. Uh, I think that that would be an important topic to discuss maybe at our next meeting. I do want to get to um, some items uh, under new business. Seeing nothing else, item C under old business, I would like to pause on that item because Ned Hunter is not here, and I know that uh, he had thoughts and considerations with respect to the change in the postdoc year requirements. I'd like to put a pause on that and move on to new business. Does anyone have any objections with respect to that or any points that they really, really want to get in this evening when it comes to discussing changes with the postdoc? I appreciate that, and I would want for him to be a part of the discussion. In terms of new business, we've got about 20 minutes, and I think that maybe going from A and see where we go from there could be helpful. New business under A is a discussion on the presentation that we heard this evening, and that has to do with Texas and the construction of an alternative psychology licensing examination. Dave, do you have anything that you want to add with respect to introducing this topic?
Um, just that my interactions with representatives from Texas, I have met Robert at several of the meetings because he also assists with somewhat of a composite board in Texas, and and he was very active, like he talked about, concerning the previous discussion on the EPPP2 in terms of the ASPPB conversation, and so. This topic largely emerged, I think, as one of the outcomes of that conversation that we've been tracking for the last couple of years. And so they jumped right into that conversation, kind of referencing the EPPP2, and um, and a lot of this discussion started when ASPPB was initially proposing, and they were planning to require that all states that wanted to use the EPPP would have to require passage of the EPPP2. Thankfully, through the work of Texas, and we partnered with them on that and bringing concerns to that association, they changed their mind and pursued a different path. But that was sort of, I think, one of the origins they talked about real quick at the beginning. But if you're wondering sort of where this concept came from, a lot of that came from that conversation from a couple of years ago. And while EPPP is currently being reimagined by a task force associated with ASPPB, this is something that the conversation started at that time. And even though the board at ASPPB did change their position about requiring both tests separately, from what I understand, the legislature in Texas said, well, that happened, but we want to pursue some other things separately from whatever that association may want to do in the future. And so they had brought this up about in the fall, that they were exploring this, and they said we would like to make this presentation available if any states had an interest in it. So in talking about topics for this year, I had talked to Richard about it, and I thought this could be an item for the advisory committee to be aware of. And I thought the information they provided was a good explanation of how they went through the steps in terms of getting to where they're at, and then for their plan moving forward.
So I'd like to open the floor to all of you to express any comments or raise any questions that we would want to take back to the folks in Texas for clarification or anything regarding the development of a possible alternative examination for licensure.
I think I need to leave that to the people that are involved in the education of upcoming psychologists. I would like to state from a practitioner's point of view that I think there are probably inherent cultural biases in the current test that keep people from being able to successfully pass it. I'm not sure if the Texas model would have the capability to overcome that. I also know that we are in a workforce crisis in a lot of the not just psychology, right? However, I'm not comfortable with potentially lowering standards to be able to address the workforce shortage. So I don't know how you, because that's not my area of expertise, I don't know how you would assess that or address that. So where you're getting cultural competency as the alternative to a test that has inherent cultural biases in it, and continuing to ensure quality of the folks that come out the other side. Did that make sense to you guys that are
Yeah, I would say from my standpoint, Linda, I think the problem, and I don't think the EPPP is the be all end all, and a lot of problems occurred with the rollout of part 2, obviously.
Right.
However, I don't think we have an evidence base to suggest that the alternative is going to be less biased. In fact, when we look at some of the testing data, it actually introduces more bias sometimes to have qualitative or things that people need more resources to prepare for than an exam. So I think we need to be thoughtful about not necessarily going a direction because someone says that's going to occur. We need to actually have evidence for that. This can be less biased or more helpful to those that are disadvantaged, because there's some data that suggests it's actually even more problematic because you've got people that need to prep you, you've got people that need to train you, and those take resources.
Great.
But I do not think the EPPP is the greatest thing and our our answer. I think it's going to be very difficult and an upward climb to make that transition. And David, I just think Texas, it's a big state with big ideas, but I think it's going to be a very long process for them to do that, if it ever occurs.
There was a technical question that came up towards the end of the presentation, and that was if the board ultimately would want to allow the option of an alternate test. Is that something that would require a statutory change? I did look at our statutes, and the statutory language is broad. So it basically talks about requiring an examination or passage of an examination, but it basically says a licensure examination approved by the board. So with that language, I think the specific EPPP, if it is referenced, it's referenced only in the regulation, and the regulation may still say a licensing examination approved by the board. So I don't think that's going to be an issue from a technical standpoint. So I did want to kind of let you know about that piece.
And then the other thing, and of course I keep talking, even though I said I'm not in the area that needs to make the decisions, but is the equivalency of, right? Like would the Texas exam legitimately cover the same concepts equivalently to the EPPP, right? Is there when you look at the comparison across tests, is it measuring the same constructs?
Well, if I can
It's going to take a long time.
jump in there. And before I say this, it's been a decade or longer since I looked at the EPPP content-wise. But there's an argument to be made that there is some content in the EPPP that does not need to appear on the new test. For example, when I took the EPPP, there was information on IO psychology. And so, and I say this as someone who went to a school where there was an IO program, and I love those subjects and find them very interesting. But I think that's maybe something that this test could do, is at the very least trim some of the things that maybe are not needed, and or in turn maybe spur the EPPP and those folks to maybe look at what content is covered. So I don't necessarily think it needs to cover all the same content, because I'm not thrilled with all the content covered in the EPPP.
A thought I had during this too is, and maybe I missed something during the presentation, so correct if there is something here. But with the EPPP still being accepted and this being an alternative format, what's the deciding factor too on what test is being taken based off of what it does measure? And obviously, hopefully that's a question that's going to be answered, but how is that determined on this alternative test that's being taken versus the EPPP being taken?
If I heard correctly, the way that it was framed was that it's kind of like the comparison or the decision to take either the SAT or the ACT for undergrads going into college for admission. If that answers the question, so it would be dependent upon the choice of the individual examinee, and of course the jurisdiction in which they are sitting for the examination. Was that the question?
Yeah, basically, and I heard that part as far as that, but as far as like what goes into then helping somebody to decide which test to take then.
Well, I can tell you, Daniel, from training a lot of students here for a long period of time, most of the time they're going to choose a thing that is going to be practical for them, less expensive, the easiest route. And again, that's not a cop-out. It's just, again, how do I get through this door that I need to get through? And a lot of individuals actually, again, most of my students are, I want to get this done as soon as possible so I don't have to take the part two, again, financially less difficult. Also the fear of the unknown, and taking an exam just is a more known entity for a lot of graduate students, for example. I can prepare for that, I can do it and get out the door, so.
And I think, Sarah, that goes to your point earlier about the amount of time it would take to get this thing to get off the ground, because there's this matter of proof of concept in what you're talking about. Like, has there been an established track record of the examination such that students feel reasonably confident to take the alternative examination? And that can take a fairly long while to establish.
Yeah,
Any
I
other?
hope
Oh, go ahead.
I hope the results of this uh, turn to EAAA updating what they're doing, step away from part two. I find this Texas thing is going to be an extremely heavy lift, but if this leads to some reforms within the EAAA, maybe looking continually at changing percentages of what contents areas are covered, that might be the best outcome.
And if we really want to talk equity, we need to make materials available for free for preparation for the exam, because it's the things that you pay for that get you closer to passing. And that comes at a cost.
That comes at a significant cost. And I mean, I took the EAAA 14, 15 years ago, something like that. And the exam materials back then were um, often approaching, or if not in, the four figures. So this is this is really expensive for someone who is on postdoc, or someone who has elected to not go and take a postdoc because their jurisdiction doesn't require one. I mean, it's really expensive for a someone who's just graduating to pay for these materials.
For somebody from a disadvantaged background or a non-traditional student, right? Somebody that's got a family to support. What are you going to opt to put food on the table or buy testing materials? That puts them at a disadvantage. And so I agree, Sarah. We should make it free for people. There should be an avenue to help
Yeah, I mean, if
create.
we really want more people taking the test and getting it done, open access. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting thing the board could look at, would
Yeah.
be if we reduced our fees this year, what would it be like if we increased them a little bit? And that covered how many psychologists do we get licensed a year in Kansas? How much, if we could contract with volume at the state level with a test prep company like we did with the CE company, I wonder if that would even entice more people to come here and practice for a little bit
Great
longer.
idea. I like that. I like that idea. Can you go back and put that in as a line item in the budget, David?
I think increasing fees might be a hard sell in the current climate
Dang it.
for any reason.
Yes, increasing fees, and I like the idea too. But that was the first thing that I thought of, is that increasing fees in this climate is a exceptionally hard sell when it comes to the legislature. But I do like the concept and the idea, and I was trying to scribble that down, but it'll be recorded so we could come back to it.
It's time to find a philanthropist.
Yes.
And just on all serious,
$20.
Dave, how many people do we kind of license a year? How many people do licensed at the LP level a year, like a ballpark?
So Overall, I think it's around between 1,500 to 1,700 new licensees across all the professions. Um, when it comes to psychology, I haven't looked at those totals recently, so unfortunately, I can't provide an estimate on that. But I know that
No worries.
we're right around about 1,100 total psychologists. And that number kind of goes up and goes down uh, whenever we hit sort of the expiration in June of even numbered years. But um, it has been climbing, so that's good.
Yeah, I know that each time you've reported, we've been increasing, which is really good for the state of Kansas. So
Any other thoughts on this matter?
I
Well,
guess
this is
was
something.
the original question what to take back to um Texas? Like what kind of so I guess that would be something is it do they have any idea of projected cost of the test? Um and he did talk about creating materials, but I don't know if it's too early in the process for them to have an idea of what that's going to look like, if it's going to be comparable to the EPPP.
And you know what, Tiffany, he did also say about creating materials to help study for it so that it wasn't a burden on potential exam takers, which should be available for free. So,
And that is
Yeah, is it going to cost to be free?
and that is materially different from what ASPPB does when it comes to practice materials. They don't produce any practice materials, and it's the outside companies that ascertain what might be on the exam to produce the test materials that they sell. Um, so that is something else to consider. I think that kind of gets in a way back to what Chris was saying in terms of reforms with respect to the EPPP. Like, would this be an opportunity for the EPPP to say, you know what, yes, it's time for us to produce practice materials so that
Mhm.
we can see more with respect to uh, pass rates. Linda, were you going to say something?
No, I was just opening up my window so I could see all your faces. Sorry.
I do have data for you. Was able to find that quickly. The number of new licensed psychologists that were licensed last year at the end of fiscal year 25, 78 new psychologists at the PhD level, the licensed psychologist. Now, we also use the EPPP for the master's level as well. And so when you're looking at master's level, the two levels combined, the LCPs and the LMLPs, 44 new licensees. So between the two groups, we're talking about 120 or so.
Okay. That's very good to know in light of the recommendations or the considerations that are being put forward with our committee. Um, Anything, and I realize that we are almost out of time. The what Tiffany said about the cost of the examination, that's a question that is what you said, Tiffany, right? The cost of the examination as well as any potential costs with respect to testing materials. That is something that we could ask the folks down in Texas about, and we can continue this discussion in our next advisory committee to determine whether or not there are other more formal questions that to add to the one that we might send to, or that we would potentially send to Texas um, at present. Any objection to doing something like that? We can kind of circle back to this to see if there might be other specific questions that we might ask, because I realize that we are running out of time. Okay. Um, I don't think that we have time for anything else this evening. Dave, do you have any thoughts?
Uh, I think I can summarize this really quickly, probably under a minute.
Go ahead.
So there's a topic on your agenda, a Model Practice Act from APA. Generally, when it comes to licensing matters, a lot of the association we work with is the ASPPB, the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, but APA licenses a lot of programs for psychology. APA has talked about and is coming out with a Model Practice Act that has been published. It's open for public comment. The reason I wanted to cover it just quickly is that public comment time period is going to close here quickly. So if you do want to provide public comment on that, since there's not going to be time to bring this back to the board before the next board meeting, you would have to do it as individuals. But I believe public comment on that closes March 3rd. So feel free to take a look at that. If you want to comment on individuals, feel free. We can talk about what it means more at the next meeting.
Thank you for that, Dave. I appreciate it. Well, we have come to the end of our time together today. I will prioritize the third point, point C under new business when it comes to additional topics that we might want to cover over the course of the rest of 2026 for our next meeting. And that being said, do I have a motion to adjourn our time together this evening?
Motion to adjourn.
Sarah moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Multiple seconds. I don't think that needs any discussion or a formal vote. We will see each other again in 2 months. We're back on schedule, and that will be Tuesday, the 14th of April, 2026 at 6 p.m.
All right.
All right. You all have a good evening. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night.